If you have gut dysfunction, the factory is down, you're getting low
Right.
production, right? Dysfunction equals
Right.
poor production. And we have poor production, we have imbalances. So your brain chemicals become imbalanced, and we can see mental health issues. On the other hand, anxiety, often considered to be an inflammatory condition. So again, it's exactly that. It's neurological inflammation. Or if we look at how blood and lymphs connect to your brain, right? Underneath biologically, the circle of Willis, the arteries down there. You look at your ventricles
Yeah.
and how all these fluids circulate. Well, if you have inflammatory pathogens in one area, what's saying they can't get to the brain? So we're looking at inflammatory brain conditions. And so even speaking to psychologists and mental health specialists, other gut specialists, so far the consensus is 100%. And I got to find a study, maybe I can back it up somehow, but 100% of people dealing with mental health issues have gut issues of some kind. And never in medicine, almost
Wow.
never, I don't like absolutes, but I should say almost never are there 100% in anything.
Oh, the gut. People often say everything comes back to the gut. And when I was in residency in medical school, I knew the gut was important. And I was the guy that was pressing my professors around the importance of educating on our processed wheat and all these other proteins, gliadins, and glutens, and all this stuff that are in our foodstuffs here in the United States, and how that can be, even outside of a formal diagnosis of celiac, how that could actually be problematic. But I don't know if I ever fully appreciated the role of the gut microbiome and the biome on our skin, outside and inside our genitals. If you're a woman listening, your vulva, the vagina, the cervix, even in the endometrial cavity. There's very, very few places in the body that I think are truly sterile. Like, I bet even the brain, the CSF, aren't truly sterile. I bet there are bugs everywhere. And the reason is because bugs are not necessarily the bad guys, especially when we're looking at the microbiome and how we symbiotically support so many bacteria and viruses, even though they're not living things, in and on our bodies. And they, fortunately, in our intestines anyways, are there to digest and help us absorb nutrients, and also to maintain the integrity of our intestinal lining, which should remain relatively impermeable. My guest today is Josh Dech, and he is I don't like to use the word expert very often, but man, is this guy a badass when it comes to helping people correct a variety of chronic illnesses by starting with the gut and then going from there. I've started doing this myself since I've done training with the Institute for Functional Medicine and Mark Hyman's team. I've started running stool analyses on people, and I can get them back on their feet way faster than just doing a one point in time lab work. It doesn't matter how fancy the lab work. It doesn't matter if you go to Waste to Well or whatever. Sorry, Waste to Well. If you're not looking at the gut, you're probably missing something important. And I even just did a stool analysis on my daughter because she had some intermittent chronic diarrhea, and sure enough, she has a parasite infection. Go figure. So we're gonna have to talk about how can we holistically treat that, through more natural remedies than blasting it with metronidazole, also known as Flagyl, because that is going to disrupt some of the other bacteria there, and then we're going to have to fix that. This is like the way the conventional medical model works. You treat something, and then you have to treat the problems you've now created. So Josh does a tremendous amount of good work out there. He's got a podcast as well called Reversible Pod. We'll put all the links here in the podcast description. And I'd be remiss to not, if I didn't mention that in both of the programs that are now available, the Born Free Method, I helped co-create that with Sarah Rosser, who's a badass midwife, and then Clear and Free, your holistic solution to persistent HPV, co-created with a badass health coach named Mimi Lindquist. In both of those programs, I go deep into the microbiome and how the role of the gut is not just a reflection of ill health, but also perhaps the primary target for fixing a variety of chronic illnesses, including, of course, persistent viral infections like herpes, like HPV. if you're having any of these issues, you have to ask, what's going on with my immune system? And if 80% of your immune system is tied into the intestinal lining in gut-associated lymphoid tissue, it just bears asking the question, what if I've got something going on in my intestines? So Josh demystifies a lot of this, provides some really, really great tools for you to get started in dialing in your health, starting with the guts. He's a great human. He's very well spoken. And he has also provided quite a bit of studies that we'll put into the show notes here, the podcast description, in order for you to learn a little bit more. If you're not watching on YouTube, we have a YouTube channel. If you haven't subscribed to this podcast or shared with your friends, please do. And if you haven't left a 5-star review, do that, guys. It really, really matters. Before we get started, we do have one sponsor, as with every episode. This one is Immune Intel HCC. And if you go to the medicine without the E, THEMEDICIN.com/products and use code beloved10, you get 10% off a bottle of Immune Intel HCC, which is featured in both my Born Free method and Clear and Free because it works that well. Hundreds of stories coming back from women who have abnormal PAPs, persistent HPV for years, and bam, with some lifestyle coaching, as well as the addition of this incredibly important supplement, they're walking away with a clean bill of health. And of course, it doesn't just go away forever. You obviously have to keep dialing these things in. That's why we do all the coaching and additional education in our Clear and Free program. So the medicine is a company that was started by Chase Ramey and Mimi Lindquist. Mimi Lindquist, of course, is involved in my Clear and Free project. They developed this product, which is made from the mycelia of shiitake mushrooms. It boosts your NK cells, your other T cells. It helps to promote communication between your immune cells. And this increased immune response will decrease systemic inflammation or help get your immune system back on order. It's an important part of getting your adrenals or your hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis back in order. There is so many benefits to this supplement alone, which is why I've kicked the other supplements out. And we're just talking about this one because I think focusing on those most important nutrients and important supplements in our life is where it's at for me right now. There's a plenty of good products out there, but none of them works like this one. So if you want to try it again, it's themedicinewithoutthee.com/products, code beloved10 to get 10% off your purchase. Subscribe and just get a bottle every couple months. That's the way to go. I take a bottle every 4 months because I know that I do better on this. So, and Josh Dech would agree, this is a great product. So I don't mean to speak for you, Josh, but I think if you could see some of the literature here and how they're using this in vitro and in vivo trials in order to help women with this persistent pesky problem, I think you'd agree. And of course, it is one of those, these functional mushrooms that are all the rage right now are so, so helpful for improving the communication between these various endocrine systems because they're made from mycelia, which in nature is like nature's internet. So, go and check out that product. Check out Clear and Free. It's clearhpv.com. If you're interested in Born Free Method, that's bornfreemethod.com. Very easy domains on this end. Without further ado, here's my new friend and nutritionist, gut health specialist, Josh Dech of the Reversible Podcast. Josh, welcome. It's always nice to have another podcaster on the show because your audio and your video and everything is just dialed in. So this is just going to be, we can just focus on flowing here.
I'm looking forward to it. I had actually just gone to Long and McQuaid today to get a new connector for my audio because it's getting this low grade, like a white noise hiss. My wife says I'm obsessing. It's driving me nuts.
I'm the same
So-
way. It's like there's some little connection. Three loop connection is just like
It's just not enough.
It's just not quite doing it. Well, Josh, you've got a podcast yourself, the Reversible Podcast. You were gracious enough to have me on as a guest to talk a little bit about fertility. I'm going to return the favor and go a little bit into what your area of focus is as a holistic nutritionist, which is the gut. I mean, everything. If anybody listens to your podcast, you'll get an appreciation for what people like Mark Hyman have been talking about for years, which is that God darn it, everything seems to come back to an unhealthy gut. So I know that one thing that I heard when I was doing my due diligence and listening to a variety of your interviews and your podcasts, again, it's reversiblepod.com, guys, if you want to find Josh's work. you often reiterate that like most of the things that are ailing our population, the most expensive chronic illnesses, many of them come right back to the gut. So could you just like ring them off for people in case people are kind of delusional still about this?
Hell yeah, I can. Yeah. So I often will throw the stats like 14 out of 15 of the leading causes of death, or 93% of the leading causes of death come back to the gut, and or they're long-term chronic inflammatory conditions related to diet and lifestyle, which affect your gut.
Yeah.
And so there's always a gut connection. So if I can rattle them off for you, we got heart disease, we have cancers, cerebrovascular disease. So that's going to be your strokes and other brain disease, chronic lower respiratory disease, diabetes, Alzheimer's, nephritis, chronic liver disease or cirrhosis, primary hypertension, hypertensive renal disease, Parkinson's, influenza, pneumonia, and septicemia.
So when we say thank you for that. So
Mhm.
when we just to give some clarification for people, I don't think it's fair to say that the gut alone, an elevated type of bacteria or whatever, or a little bit of like maybe some calprotectin elevation or whatever, that that is causing this. But this
That's
is
right.
almost like a signal that something's off in the body. And all of those conditions you listed off are downstream consequences of decades of just abuse of not only the body, but specifically the gut, which is where you're digesting and absorbing nutrients. Do I have that correct?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's very multifactorial. And some of these, I would
Absolutely.
absolutely blame the gut and say entirely your gut caused this. I don't think that would be unreasonable. But I think right now, until we have a time travel available to everybody, we can't go back and figure out exactly the roots of stuff.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
know, for example, if someone comes in and they have leaky gut. We hear a lot about leaky gut. What is leaky gut? First of all, it's actually a good thing in moderate amounts. Your body will deliberately create leaks in order to flush stuff out like a garden hose on the driveway, right? It wants to move stuff through. So that's like gluten, other things you shouldn't eat, things that, oh, like it gave me diarrhea. That's probably your body creating leaky gut to draw water in to flush out quickly. So it doesn't become an
Oh.
issue, right?
Oh, so the leaks go both ways then, in other
It
words?
does. Yeah.
Ah,
So your
well,
body
you've
will
already
deliberately.
intrigued me.
Oh, all right, well, let's keep going. So your body will deliberately create leaks to bring water in. The problem is we know things get through the gut. They're supposed to. It gets into your bloodstream. That's how nutrients and your lymph, like things travel through your body. Now, when we have leaks that are too big, instead of micromolecules of nutrients getting into your blood to circulate around your body, macromolecules get through. So we
Like
can
large
let those.
proteins and things?
Yeah, like undigested food. If you look at live blood analysis of someone with gut issues, you can actually see food in their blood. You can see a piece of chicken
Wow.
floating around, right? Microscopic, but you can see it. And so when these leaks become created and they're sustained long term, that's when we get macromolecules leaking out and getting to places they shouldn't, which does lead to inflammation throughout the body because now these inflammatory processes from the gut are circulating everywhere. I have
Yeah,
seen asthma fixed by fixing leaky gut. I've seen,
me too. Yeah.
right? It's so bizarre. Skin issues, diabetes, all coming back to the gut because they're all inflammatory conditions.
So, I wanna, you listed so many things there. So in order to, like, isolate and sort of categorize them, I think one big area and I actually learned this, it was kinda stupid of me, I didn't really pick up on the connection, I had, like, a suspicion, but
Mm.
then I read, Kelly Brogan's book, around birth control and how that just does so many harms on the gut, and
Mhm.
being a gynecologist, having given out birth control to so many women, age 15 all the way up to 60 for various reasons, I was like, "Shit, I guess my suspicion was right that there's actually a connection here between all of these mental health issues, right? From depression to anxiety, maybe even
Mm.
to some of the more, catastrophic diagnoses like schizophrenia and whatnot, that are related to maybe not even just a leaky gut picture, but perhaps some generic inflammation that's happening in the body that gets into the central nervous system. Can you talk about mental health and the connection to the gut?
Totally. I mean, one that keeps getting reiterated time and time again is going to be like neurotransmitters being produced in the gut, right? Being produced by bacteria. So you got your serotonin and other. There's a bi-directional communication between your gut and your brain, right? So things go back and forth, and your brain always wants to talk to your gut. That's why we call it the enteric nervous system. And so we know it's very, very important. We know they're all connected, and so it's not out of reach to say that even something simple like you're lacking serotonin or dopamine or other neurotransmitters that are made in your gut. If you have gut dysfunction, the factory is
Right,
down, you're getting low production,
right.
right? Dysfunction equals poor production. If we have poor production, we have imbalances. So your brain chemicals become imbalanced. We can see mental health issues. On the other hand, anxiety often considered to be an inflammatory condition. So
Mm,
again, it's exactly that. It's neurological inflammation. Or if we look at how blood and lymphs connect to your brain, right? Underneath biologically, the circle of Willis, the arteries down there.
yeah.
You look at your ventricles and how all these fluids circulate. Well, if you have inflammatory pathogens in one area, what's saying they can't get to the brain? So we're looking at inflammatory brain conditions.
Mm,
And so, even speaking to psychologists and mental health specialists, other gut specialists, so far the consensus is 100%. And I got to find a study, maybe I can back it up somehow, but 100% of people dealing with mental health issues have gut issues of some kind. And
wow.
never in medicine, almost never, I don't like absolutes, but I should say almost never are there 100% in anything.
Yeah, so to speak to that as a practitioner, there's a lot of people out there, pontificating and conjecturing and circulating little tidbits. They took a workshop online or whatever, and now they're like, the gut's everything. Well,
Mhm.
I am in direct clinical practice here with people who have postpartum depression, postpartum blues. They've got this ongoing anxiety picture, and almost always I say, let's just start with a gut analysis. And I personally like GI effects. There's plenty out there.
Mhm.
There's GI map, there's GI 360, there's
There's
all these.
Zoomers and all kinds.
Yeah, yeah, Zoomers is a good one. And they range in price, but in general, when you get an analysis like that, you can see a variety of things there that are very, very easily rectified. And when you rectify them, suddenly this person is feeling better. They may not be 100%. It may not be just that they've got some gut dysbiosis or inflammation in the lining of the intestines or maybe a nutrient deficiency, but in general, they feel a little bit better. What has been your experience? Could you give like a case study of somebody who maybe had some anxiety and what you saw on a stool
Mm,
analysis and how it was like a not an overnight fix. There's no silver bullets here, but
of
just
course.
even small changes that actually led to a I don't know, a better
Yeah.
experience for them through the lens of depression and anxiety.
Oh my, so many. Yeah, I'm glad you asked. So a lot of doctors, and I've talked to many. There are some brilliant doctors out there that I've met with or had interviews with, and they'll say a lot of them don't like GI maps. And I see on one end where they're coming from. Medicine, especially Western, really likes conclusive data,
Right.
randomized control, placebo, double blind studies that works, right? Those cost millions of dollars, millions to get that much data over X amount of time. It's very expensive. And in my view, the people who pay for those are going to be pharmaceutical companies who can benefit from the end result of that study, which is going to say conclusively, well, we need this drug and here's why it benefits. But to go back and say, well, you can try these herbs or these probiotics, they're dirt cheap, pennies on the dollar compared to
Right.
pharmaceuticals. So we
Right.
don't have those studies, but I can talk from anecdotal and clinical evidence time and time again, dozens, if not hundreds of cases over the years. So I'll give you some examples. Client of mine came in. She had anxiety. She had skin issues. She was dealing with a bit of psoriasis, some eczema, and occasionally some cystic acne. We see that a
Me.
fair bit, right? I've actually got a little on myself now. I'm doing a new stool test because I believe I got some candida I didn't get right the first time. And that
Yeah.
will, right?
Yeah.
This fungal infections cause issues.
Yeah.
And so she was coming in, she had insomnia, severe anxiety, everything, food anxiety. There was a lot of food preferences, or really we call it picky eater, a lot of issues there. And so we looked into her gut, everything would run through her. She'd eat, she'd have a 10, 15-minute transit time if she was lucky, right? A lot of the times it was just run right through, a lot of diarrhea, a lot of stomach aches, asthma. She was the one I was actually referring to earlier. And so we went through, did a GI map, and I saw a lot of things. Now, in a typical GI map, for those of you who don't know, it's as much of an analysis of your stool as we can see. The reason I was saying a lot of doctors don't like them is because it's not super conclusive. We have 1 to 2,000 species and 7 to 9,000 different strains of bacteria in our gut, give or take, which means we have upwards of 18 million different types of bacteria. On a GI map, we can see what, 50, 75, give or take. And it's more umbrella. So it's the lactobacillus umbrella, it's the bifidobacterium umbrella. And so it's not conclusive enough for Western to say, here's exactly what to do or what drug to give or what drug to treat with. But in my clinical experience, it is concrete enough for us
Yeah.
to make dramatic changes. And
With a
so,
very, very small investment. Sometimes we'll talk about fiber and things like that, but sometimes
totally.
this is not even a matter of going out and getting a $600 supplement. This might just be like 50 bucks for a couple months and you're actually feeling better. Like it could be as
Oh,
simple as
yeah.
that. But go on, sorry.
No, you're good. I even tell some of my clients to culture their own probiotics and juice or make yogurt. You can make one bottle last a year. You just make your own,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, that's a good idea. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Just get a pesticide-free, sugar-filled juice like grape juice or orange juice or something. But anyway, so So one of the reasons I don't use them is non-conclusive, but I look at it and say, okay, well, we can see very commonly in like inflammatory bowel disease where I specialize, we can see Akkermansia commonly depleted, a lot of lactobacillus or basic ones commonly depleted. You could simply just get a probiotic, fill it up, and oftentimes that's enough because these bacteria produce a lot of byproducts. They're responsible for short chain fatty acids like butyrate, immune balancing. They're responsible for producing certain vitamins. We even know vitamin K is made in the gut, certain B vitamins. And once you have more of these, it's not just, well, I got this one nutrient I was missing. We can hyperfixate on one nutrient or one bacteria, but it's about balance. It's an
Right.
ecosystem living in harmony. And I
Right.
think because we want to quantify things so much in the Western world, we kind of lose this lack of harmony and we almost hyperdose things just because, well, I want to get more. More is better. More is better. But balance is best. And we
Yeah.
look at the gut. I use an analogy. Your gut is kind of like a neighborhood, right? Whether we like it or not, even the crackheads contribute to the ecosystem or the financial system somehow, right? They contribute in a way. And so if every grocery store and every coffee shop was selling crack, the ecosystem would collapse very quickly. The entire community
Right.
would go under. So we need police. And these are your good bacteria. These are the ones that we call commensal or keystone. They're beneficial, the ones you can buy probiotics for. They keep things under control. They regulate a lot of these, quote, bad or opportunistic bacteria, and they can help. They kind of compete for space and all kinds. And so taking these probiotics when you need them is contributing to a good thing. But overcrowding is also a bad thing,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I do want to eventually get into the pre and probiotic
Sure.
conversation because I actually think that like you said, we've become so focused on what is lacking, what external product is lacking versus are there just some fine tuning that can be done to your diet in order to support a healthy gut microbiome. So we'll
Mhm.
get into that. Before we do though, I wanted to have you touch maybe on what is the importance of focusing on the gut from a standpoint of excuse me, reproduction or let's say the menstrual cycle.
Mhm.
And then also the immune system, because all of these three systems, the nervous system, the immune system, and the endocrine system, are so intimately linked to the gut. And they also, no surprise, they also, when there's dysfunction there in either of those three systems, lead to any of or multiple of the conditions that you mentioned early in the show.
Yeah. So obviously, they're so very linked. So any issue in one is going to precipitate a trickle down effect to the others. We know that. And so knowing how they circulate, we can look at things and say, okay, well, we know if you have inflammation in the gut, for example, it's going to create inflammation in other areas, your lymphatic system, your nervous system, and all those things. Every time we have inflammation, every time we have any kind of excess stress from the body. And I say stress is everything. I'm not talking
Right.
relationship
Right.
stress, financial stress. Anything requiring your body to use excess resources is a stressor. Being
Bingo.
pregnant,
Love that. Josh, I love that.
yeah, put that on a t-shirt. And so being pregnant is a stressor on the body. It may be use stress, not distress, like a negative one, but it's a stressor. And so we have these excess needs of resources when we're inflamed, when we have gut issues. And what do you need when you're pregnant and you're developing a baby? A mountainous surplus of
Yeah.
resources,
Yeah.
right? And when you're inflamed because of gut issues, wherever else, you're using resources in excess. You're developing a baby which pulls resources in excess, which is bad for the mother or the host to
That's
be able
right.
to grow a baby successfully.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so many of us are already in the red. Look at farming and agriculture today. We know our food is grown artificially. A lot of it's GMO, and it's grown in soil that is dirt. It's not soil,
Mm. Mhm.
right? There's something called the biogeochemical cycle. And think of this: when an apple falls off a tree, it rots into the ground, it decomposes, the grass grows from those nutrients. The cow eats that, I eat the cow. So I got the nutrients from all of that biogeochemical cycling, and it got into my body. That's nutrient rich soil. Nutrient rich soil and bioregenerative farms, these proper farms that are done well, not for just maximizing profit, they're actually cycling crops through. They're moving animals around. They really rarely will till the soil because it destroys the microbes. Modern soil is tilled, it's dry, it's barren. So our food is void of nutrients. We're highly stressed all the time. We're sick. We're always in the red. And then you add inflammation or chronic inflammatory disease or gut issues, which will, again, now you're not absorbing the very little nutrients you are getting from your food.
Right.
And then
Right.
you're pregnant. It's no wonder we're sick all the time, and it's no wonder we have such high mortality rates or developmental issues in children, because we're all so deficient. We're lacking
Mhm.
resources from every which
Mm.
way.
And so, what if a woman's not pregnant? Something I'm really focused on right now, which I didn't ever think, Josh, I'd be this focused on this, but
Mhm.
I'm looking at HPV, other viral, quote illnesses. I'm not certain that I really want to call persistent HPV a viral illness, but
Mhm.
whenever you have a virus, call it a exosome, call it a little messenger from the outside, it gets into the body, and for some reason, some people aren't able to clear it. That tells me, hey, I'm still picking up this signal that you're not integrating. It's almost like trying to upgrade your operating system, and the operating system just isn't able to take on the new Mac OS,
Mm.
whatever. So we've got this issue. And then if that persists, you get this inflammatory pattern, right? Which reflects something related to everything we've been talking about. And you end up with abnormal cells on the cervix. One application of what we're talking about that I'm finding is, hey, if you're getting abnormal pap smears, you're getting the development of SIN2, SIN3, maybe you're even looking at an excision procedure, you've got this HPV thing that won't go away, yet your neighbor is
Mm.
doing just fine. When I do a gut analysis or when I start to get some of this inflammation under control, suddenly now they're clear of HPV, the dysplasia reverses. And so there's some connection between the gut and the immune system. And without maybe getting too far into the weeds on gut associated lymphoid tissue,
Mhm.
can you just kind of riff a little bit on the importance of the gut as it pertains to the immune system and immune health?
Oh, so much. So it comes back to a lot of different things. So number one, we have your gut bacteria, right? And I could write off 20 different points. So I'll kind of try to summarize. It's really, the question is, what doesn't it do? How isn't it connected? Right? So for short, we know our gut bacteria outnumber our own cells in our body 10 to 1, like dramatically. We have about 23,000 genes that make up the human genome. And I want to say it's upwards of 3 million different genes that make up your gut bacteria in your body. So it's like 130 times more genes in your bacteria than your actual body, which is crazy in itself.
Yeah,
Look at the gut
it's
bacteria.
wild.
Oh, it's bananas, man. We're more microbes than anything else. And actually, a conversation with Leo Galliani was saying that we even have these viruses that we can find in all these bacteria, outnumbering even the bacteria 35 to 1. So one could
35.
argue
So I've read 10 to
35.
1. It's actually even higher than that. Yeah, that's probably because we don't have a clear definition as to what a virus is, but
It's a crapshoot.
it's a lot. There's a ton of viruses. If they were out to get us to like murder us, then we would be dead in our tracks. So there's
Oh,
something more to the story.
it's like if ants took over and decided to recolonize and take over humans, we'd all be done for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
But if you look at your own cells, your bacteria outnumber them 10 to 1. The viruses outnumber bacteria 35 to 1. So even those outnumber your own cells
Wow.
350 to 1. So we're more
Wow.
microbes than anything else. And
Yeah.
so your bacteria do so much for you. They're there for immunomodulation and balancing immune responses to different pathogens. They reduce risk of allergies. We talked earlier about short chain fatty acids, right? Fibers get fermented by your body into things like butyrate, propionate, acetate, which are used for like anti-inflammatory responses. They balance the
They're
immune
fuel.
system. They're
Yeah.
fuel. Oh, they're
Yeah.
phenomenal for you.
Yeah.
And one supplement I actually use often, working in gut disease or trying to repair guts, is butyrate. Lots of studies will show 3 to 5 grams a day, if you can tolerate it well, can be really phenomenal for even helping balance gut bacteria as well as repairing
Oh,
tissue in the immune
interesting.
system. Mhm.
Interesting.
So
Wow.
very beneficial nutrients. We talked briefly. You mentioned you didn't want to get into the galt, or you would like to get into the galt.
We can go that direction. I mean, I talk about it a lot, but I know
Okay.
you are a wealth of information, so I don't want to steer you off the path here into
Sure.
the crevasses, that you and I live in. But let's talk a little bit about that. The majority of our immune cells live in the
Mhm.
lining of the intestines, which makes sense because there's all these quote bad guys living in the gut that are actually symbiotically relying on us to keep them alive and vice versa. So we've got
Mhm.
all these immune cells that are keeping these checks and balances, but I suspect, and I've seen this in clinical practice, that when the gut starts to become inflamed and out of balance, out of harmony with itself and with you as the host, you end up starting to see a change in the immune system as well. And I'm
Mhm.
wondering if it's due to direct changes within gults, or if it's something even more insidious, maybe elsewhere in the body, or maybe it's both.
I don't know if we can say exactly for sure unless you want to spend $10,000 on different tests. And even then, as you know, we're hypothesizing, right? It's still such unknown territory. We're still learning so much about the gut and the bacteria and how they work. What I can tell you is that your gut, right? Inside the gut, there we have a lot of gut bacteria influencing the maturation of T cells and B cells. You got your macrophages and dendritic cells. We can talk about the second brain of the enteric nervous system, but these are all hosened. They are housed in the gut, and so that's in the mucosal lining of your GI tract. All right. Also, you might if you're big listeners, you might have heard the term MALT, which will be your mucosa associated lymphoid tissue, but it's all lymphatic tissue in the gut. That's all it really means. And so that GALT, or your gut lymphatics, actually they produce a lot of your IgA, and your IgA is responsible for a lot of the immune responses in mucosal layers. And so if you have gut issues, well, what is the vagina made of? Mucosal tissue, right?
Right,
Orally,
right.
mucosal tissue, your gut, mucosal tissue. And so we're dealing with pathogens or things entering that shouldn't be there, right? Even the use of like a tampon or sex, right? Anything where, fingers or genitals that can enter pathogens into mucosal tissue. If you have gut issues and you have a decrease of these IgAs or an inefficient immune response, of course you're going to have or be more prone to other inflammatory conditions. And not only that, we talked about leaks in the gut, right? Your small intestine is one cell thick before things start to enter the bloodstream. The colon is 2. And so it's very, very small. Well, if you're inflamed and you have leaks, what
Mm,
organs are directly touching all your reproductive
right,
organs? Your
right, right,
intestines.
right. Hmm.
So it's
So
so
you
direct.
yeah, it's absolutely. And we haven't even really gotten into the role of the liver and how it's, stuff goes into the blood through the intestines and passes through the liver. It's called first pass metabolism. Like there's so much to this conversation that we could go on for hours. So I think we've established that there's a variety of conditions that can result from an abnormal gut. I
Mhm.
think a lot of people are wondering, is my gut responsible? Maybe they've done an analysis here, and they're looking at it. So I had a recent client who he's actually a friend, so I haven't actually started working with him yet, but I have my suspicions as to what's going on. And as a spoiler, I actually think a lot of his he has lower abdominal and sort of like a pelvic kind of lower back discomfort.
Mhm.
And so his doctor was like, let's do a stool analysis, right? And so they did that, and it was like one of the cleanest analyses I'd seen, but there was elevated fusobacterium.
Mhm.
Everything else was pretty normal. It was a good commensal balance, good overall abundance. There was none of the major inflammatory markers, maybe slightly elevation in IgA. And his doctor was like, well, you better get a colonoscopy. You might have colon cancer. And he was like, hold on. Are you serious? Like, I don't
It's a
feel
big
like I have
jump.
cancer. It's a big leap to the big C word there. So whenever you see an elevated bacteria, let's say fusobacterium, it's not one
Mhm.
that we hear a lot about, only because if you go to your fancy grocery store and look at all of the bottles of probiotics, they're usually looking to help you supplement with lactobacillus species or bifidum bacteria species.
Mhm.
What do you think about fusobacterium? Is there some specific concern with that bacteria?
We have to keep in mind, right? We talked earlier about the neighborhood and the balance, the harmony.
Mhm.
It's all about harmony. So any overgrowth can cause an issue. Any overgrowth can lead to inflammation. And it's hard to live in a house when it's on fire. And so when your bacteria are living in a gut that's inflamed, it's a lot of the same situation. We get a lot of overgrowth, or the opportunistic bacteria can creep in.
Mm,
And all that means is when they have the opportunity to, when the police are no longer there, or we defunded the police and now the gangs are running wild and there's drugs in the streets, these bacteria that they're creeping in. And so we do see this. So fusobacterium is actually considered an opportunistic pathogen, but it is a normal part of our flora.
right. You
Even
should have it
candida,
there. If you don't have it, you're actually that's also
huge
problematic.
problem.
Yeah.
Totally, right?
Yeah.
It's all about the economy. Let the crackheads do what the crackheads are going to do. It's just don't let them go crazy. So they're
Yeah.
part of the normal economy of the ecosystem.
Sorry to all
But
the crackheads listening, by the way. If you're a crackhead, we still love you here.
we still love
It's
you.
maybe you may need to make a couple better life choices, but we love everybody equally here. Anyways, go
Yes,
on.
you do still have a part to play, even in your
Yeah.
current state. But they will move in when they have the chance, right? They'll call them squatters. And
Yeah, right.
so it's opportunistic fusobacterium. in less than ideal conditions can creep in. Now, we know it's associated with things like oral infections or other infections, systemic inflammation, right? They're opportunistic. They will do that when they are allowed to. And so something we can try, I mean, again, you can try throwing in things like butyrate. You could try, honestly, I've seen people have great success, a little bit of gut issues because the microbes are out of balance. Now, antibiotics, pharmaceutical antibiotics, are
Mm,
very rarely selective. And they do a great job of killing just about everything always, but plants are selective. And not only that, but they can actually help grow good bacteria. And so look at something like garlic, right? It's a
mm,
fermentable carbohydrate. And so it can be fermented into those short chain fatty acids, right? Those things that are highly beneficial, good nutrient source, good for the brain, good for the nerves, everything. But they're also highly antimicrobial. So not only will they feed the good, but they can also push down the bad. So I've seen people with minor gut issues just crush up some garlic and mix it in water and drink that twice a day for a week or two. And like, yeah, gut issues are gone because they've corrected and the neighborhood came back to balance.
yeah.
And sometimes that can be that simple.
Hey guys, it's Nathan. Sorry for this brief interruption, but I got to tell you about a new offering that I'm going to be making available this fall. You've heard about the Born Free Method. That's our comprehensive pregnancy and postpartum program. It includes 12 months of weekly calls, 100 plus video modules, tons of citations around pregnancy and postpartum. Well, Born Free is an umbrella under which there's going to be a lot of other courses. And the second course in this anthology is called Clear and Free, Your Solution to Persistent HPV. It's a collaborative effort between me and Mimi Lindquist of the Medicine Podcast. She is a relative expert in, I say relative because I don't consider anybody a full expert in anything, but Mimi has gone deep into human papillomavirus and some of the ways that we can use lifestyle to augment the immune system in hopes that your routine screening for HPV or your routine pap smears are going to come up negative and clear. So you can go another 3 to 5 years and not even think about it until your next appointment, whereby hopefully you'll screen negative again. So the typical path that many women experience of all ages in their OBGYN clinic is, hey, you're due for a pap smear and we're going to test for HPV as well. If one of those comes back abnormal, your OBGYN is going to say, oh, darn it, it's abnormal. Why don't you come back for a repeat screening in 6 months or 12 months? And this process continues, right, until you end up with either a progression of abnormal cells in the cervix caught on pap smear or a persistence of human papillomavirus, meaning your body has not been able to integrate the message of this virus, right? Remember, viruses are not living things. So in the meantime, your OB/GYN or your midwife or nurse practitioner hasn't given you any tools in order to help support your immune system through diet, through movement, through sleep, through stress management, through hydration, through all of those modifiable lifestyle factors so that you can be sure that if you had an HPV positive screen initially, that the next time it's going to be negative. Now, the other part of that conversation, of course, is, hey, I got the HPV vaccine. Aren't I safe now? Well, the problem with Gardasil 9, which is the primary vaccine that is offered to young men and women as early as age 9, has not been demonstrated to be either effective at preventing cervical cancer nor safe because of the aluminum adjuvants and everything else. So there's a lot of controversy around HPV and cervical cancer and even cervical cancer screening methods along with this vaccine. What do I do? Should I get it? Should I not get it? Should my little girls get this vaccine? And so given the sort of swirling pool of information and misinformation out there, I went deep as well. And Mimi and I teamed up in order to clarify for everybody out there the realities around what HPV and cervical cancer screening looks like, what can be done while you're waiting for your follow-ups in order to support your immune system to integrate the message of that virus and avoid any abnormal cells developing, and hopefully avoid painful biopsies or even worse, LEAP procedures, cold knife comb procedures, and of course, worst case scenarios, cervical cancer. There's so much that's in your power. Your doctors, your practitioners probably aren't maybe educated or incentivized to share all of that information, but we're going to do that through this course, as well as all of the realities around vaccines, especially Gardasil 9. We look at data from the United States and elsewhere in the world. We speak to attorneys who are litigating on this topic around Gardasil 9. What you can expect from the course is around 90 lessons, self-guided. And we're going to also offer monthly calls for 6 months after you enroll with me and Mimi, where we're going to be able to answer all of your questions and provide you with that support that perhaps you aren't getting from the healthcare professionals that you've entrusted your cervical cancer screening and your well woman care. So we get into HPV, we get into cervical cancer screening, we get into the immune system, vaccines, viruses. It's everything you wanted to know about any of those topics. Go to the link in the show notes and you'll find your way to book an enrollment call, and we'll get you enrolled right there. We're going to be enrolling in October. I hope to see you there. Yeah, I actually feel, something I'll add to that is, so my wife is Mexican. People who listen to the show have heard so many stories about her and my mother-in-law. They're remedies for various things, but
Mm,
garlic, ginger, and honey mixed into like a little tonic, a little spoonful a day. Everybody always says like, oh, it's good for your immune system. It is, but indirectly, it's actually really, really good for your gut to be taking in some of these soluble and insoluble fibers. And as well as having some of the medicinal micronutrients in various plants like garlic. So I'll throw I'll give you a little additional information about this particular friend. He also has very tight hips. And so he's been sitting in front of a computer, and all of this stuff, lower back pain and tight hips and tight hip flexors and whatnot, we've actually started to resolve his symptoms just by doing some basic biomechanics and mobility
mm,
work in the hips and lower back, which can manifest as inflammation in the gut because everything is connected. And by resolving some of those things, you actually can start to see probably a change in your microbiota simply by changing how the viscera, right, which is attached to all this connective tissue, is starting to integrate with one another. So
mhm,
again, another kind of rabbit hole we could go down, but I just wanted to bring that case up because a lot of people get these stool analyses, which is an expensive investment, and I honor people who do that. But when they see one specific bacteria elevated,
mm,
their doctors start to freak out, and it's because they don't have an appreciation for the inability to fully quantify the amount, or the abundance, or the whatever of the microbiome. We don't really know. And
mm,
we know that if you're eating a healthy diet, you're hydrating well, you're moving well, you're sleeping well, your stress is mitigated well, that your gut is going to respond. Your body wants to heal. So don't
mhm.
get doom and gloom. You probably don't have colon cancer. It's probably just a matter of figuring out what it is that's maybe lacking there for your body to do what it likes to do.
Yeah.
So
I think that's
um
really important. And if I can, just on
yeah.
one thing that you're saying there, Nathan, is that, you talk about the movement, right? I mean, exercise is a part of your immune system. Not only does it move blood and circulate lymphatic tissue, but we also see benefits to hormones and hormonal profile. But exactly that, it can improve gut motility, right? If you could talk about, I've had people come in with back pain and they thought, well, it's my gut. No, it's your back actually causing back
Right.
pain, in that all that connective tissue that like suspends your bowels gets pulled tight, decreasing mobility. So you get hyperfermentation or lack of like detoxification because we're not moving stool through. On
Bingo.
an right? On another hand, if you haven't seen a chiropractor in a while and you work at a desk and you have this forward posturing, even your C-spine being out of place can dampen your nervous system, putting your body into more of a fight or flight rather
Right.
than rest and digest. You have imbalanced neurological function leading to gut dysfunction, leading to immune issues. Like it's all connected.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. um All right. So I'm not going to get into the germ theory thing, but I'll just mention it. A lot of people are like, germs don't exist and they don't cause disease. It's like, guys, you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Mm,
Like, germs are not necessarily out there coming to get us. In fact, I think we've demonstrated sufficiently that there's this symbiotic relationship between us and this microbiome on our skin, in our ears, in our holes, all the holes, throughout our whole GI tract. Like, there's a symbiotic relationship. However, if I were to operate on you, like let's say I was going to do a C-section on you, Josh, that would be a very weird set of circumstances. We'd have other questions arising. But if I was in there and I just took a slash at your guts and let all those bacteria spill out, you're going to end up dying from a horrible septic, reaction due to peritonitis and everything else that comes with that. So we've got this relatively impermeable membrane separating the outside from the inside. And there is still, I think, some good there needs to be an honoring of the microbiome as opposed to a fear of the microbiome. And
Mm.
since, I don't know, people started becoming interested in this. I don't know. I just did a PubMed search before we were chatting here, and I went onto PubMed and I searched gut microbiome. I think was just the search term, very generic on PubMed, which for those who don't know is the international database of peer-reviewed literature. And 20 years ago, like around the time that I was starting med school, geez, that seems like a long time ago. But yeah, around that time, there was about 1,000 papers published. And now there's like tens of thousands of papers,
Mhm.
peer-reviewed literature, clinical trials and whatnot that have elucidated that there is some role here. So yes, germs are out there. Are they the cause of all disease? Probably not. Are they indirectly related to our health through the gut microbiome? Probably. And I think we just need to have a very, very healthy sort of a reverence for the importance and the importance of balancing this out. So I'll just leave that. Anything you want to add in there about germ theory? I was going to go deep on that, but I feel like that's a
Yeah.
kind of a waste of our time.
Well, I love that you did bring it up. Reverence was actually the exact word I had in my brain before you said it. So great minds.
Right
Um,
on.
a fun little anecdote maybe about the importance of this stuff. We really haven't known about germs for that long, right? It was only
Yeah.
about 150 years. Are you familiar with the discovery? Remember the doctor discovered hand washing?
Yeah, Lister, right? Wasn't it Joseph
Uh,
Lister?
there's a couple of guys credited for it. There's one particular story that I actually tell, 1856, Ignaz Semmelweis.
Oh,
And
Semmelweis. I was
Semmelweis.
actually thinking Semmelweis, not Lister. Sorry.
Okay, no, you're grand.
Semmelweis
That's all
was the
right.
one. Well, tell me the story because this is really an interesting story in
Oh,
history. Yeah.
it's a fantastic story.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Semmelweis was actually he was observing different pediatric wards. So there are two different wards he was observing. He was trying to figure out stuff. He was doing some research and figuring out why women were dying. So back in the day of 1850s ish and beforehand, women were dying of something called childbed fever. So
Mm,
the women would give birth, they would deliver, and then the moms would die. And the mortality was actually shockingly high. And they
yeah.
just called it childbed fever. Now, up to this point, we didn't really have much knowledge. We thought, well, God hates you, it's evil spirits, or there's war, or somebody poisoned you. And that's all we really knew about death. But 1856, Semmelweis was he was watching and observing both these wards, and he noticed that the first ward he was looking at was just midwives and priests. The second ward he was observing was doctors and nurses. Now, you'd think the doctors and nurses would do better, but that was the ward had 5 times or more. They say at least 5 times the death rate of the ward that was just midwives and priests. So he thought, well, maybe it's the smoke, maybe it's the prayers, maybe it's who knows what. And he started doing some digging, and he actually figured out the ward with midwives and priests. So we'll call it Ward 1. They did natural deliveries. That was it. Ward 2 also did deliveries, but he also realized that the doctors and nurses were also in that same hospital doing autopsies. So they were using the same tools to do autopsies as they were to do deliveries. And so they were crossing over staph bacteria and all kinds of stuff they didn't know from
Interesting.
corpses to recent delivering mums. So they're now perinatal or postnatal. And so we had these big issues. And he said, well, we should really start washing our stuff and disinfecting. And they use alcohol or whatever they would use, or lye and whatever base of soap. And all the death rates went down dramatically. Now you think this
Shocker.
guy, like, shocker, right? Be a would-be hero, like, let's celebrate this discovery. But the doctors actually got him fired. He lost his job and ended up dying alone of Alzheimer's or something, because they didn't want to be blamed for giving women childbed fever. And
I
so it's
I
crazy.
think he ended up actually being committed, like against his will,
Probably.
to like an insane asylum
Oh
because it
shit.
was so confronting